Welcome to this edition of Going Deep with me, Richard Mills, and this special guest is Craig Reines. He has just a fantastic career all over the world. In Philippines here, he was instrumental in setting up the highly successful Teletech organization, now one of the nation's most important employers, and more recently with Sitel, where he ran the Asia Pacific region for this, also one of the nation's most important employers. So we'll have an interesting session with Craig Reines and Going Deep with me, Richard Mills.
All right, well, Craig, can you go through for people? I mean, you've had quite a career, taking you around the world and so forth. Maybe from your words, can you tell us a short history of your career and what kind of guy are you anyway?
Yeah, well, look, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today, Richard. It's it's always fun, and I think my my story is not necessarily unique. I really feel quite blessed with all the experiences and opportunities that that I've had over my my career. And I was, as I was getting ready to talk to you today, I was really trying to think back on, what was the spark for me to really, embark on this international adventure, because I think that's really the big thing that's defined my career, and certainly has been such a big part of my my life and my family's life over this last 15 to 20 years. And so I was thinking about it, and one of the things my parents ensured was that we always had a week every summer where we traveled somewhere. And it wasn't really we didn't go very far. It was mostly the east coast of the US and in Canada. But that I didn't really think about it until just recently. But that, along with, I was in the Boy Scouts, and I really enjoyed the trips from the Boy Scouts. And then when I was in just entering high school, I traveled to New Mexico to go to Philmont Scout Ranch. That was the first time I'd ever been west of the Mississippi. I just think it instilled at a very early age this yearning of adventure, and I always imagined what it would be like living and working in places I'd only read about or seen in movies. And so when I was getting to the end of my my public school, my senior year in high school, I decided on the University of Arizona, and I wanted to major in astronomy. And it was funny because I had never been to Arizona before, but Tucson just sounded so exotic, so different, so far away, and it was really everything that I was looking for, thought that I was looking for, at that time of my life. And that really kind of set the stage for so many things, because I met my wife Holly at university. I'm a big, I've got kind of an insatiable appetite for Mexican food. The only real Mexican food I had ever really had was from, I don't know if you're familiar with it. There was a chain restaurant called Chi-Chi's. And that was like the big Mexican.
Sure.
But that's not really Mexican food. And so anyway, just there's so many things, from a career perspective, from a personal perspective, which I think, when I think back on what was the nexus for that, I think it really kind of came down to this desire to really have experiences that were outside of just the the very kind of narrow or small circle of friends and locations in my, where I grew up in the suburbs of Washington, D.C.
Okay. And now, just in my view, one of your big successes, just for people listening, was the Teletech organization, because that really became a big success, certainly in Philippines, across the world. And you worked with that organization when it was in a fast growth phase and really set it up in Philippines for what became a huge opportunity for the nation, 25,000 people employed these days or so. How did you join that organization? And then I understand you kind of moved up the ranks and were first to be sent to Philippines. Can you tell us about that, how that came about?
Yeah. Well, look, I had a really fun and exciting time with Teletech. I mean, it was a time when I joined the organization in '96. It was a time when the company and the industry was really exploding. I mean, just before I was hired at Teletech, they had just hired their 2,000th employee. They were, every year in those first few years, the number of employees was doubling, and they were expanding into international markets. Early on at that time, Ken Tuckman, I think, realized the focus on technology and process innovation. It was a big part of the company's ethos, and it was a great fit for me. I was there just at the right time. I was using what I had learned at this very small company-owned contact center environment for a company called Arizona Mail Order. I had learned kind of how the business worked. I had a personal knack for technology. I was looking for a platform to really be part of building the future of an industry. And so, I mean, I feel very lucky that I kind of got into that situation very early on. I don't know, again, kind of thinking back on it, if it was 10 years later or 20 years later, I'm not sure that I would have had that same kind of opportunity which led me into the Philippines. So anyway, I realized really early on that to make it, I had to make it clear that I was interested in opportunities when those opportunities presented themselves. And so I always rose my hand, whenever there was an opportunity that came up. I was hired initially it was in Tucson, Arizona, and I was hired to be a supervisor, a contact center supervisor on the UPS project, and it was a really interesting program because there was a relatively large group of folks like myself that had been brought into kind of frontline management roles. There were some middle management and obviously senior management folks, but we were all brand new, to the company, and we actually moved to Atlanta to train in the UPS facilities for 2 months, and it was just a very interesting experience. But the thing that surprised me from the very get-go was that most of my peers, they just weren't comfortable signing up for, as new opportunities presented themselves, which they did very quickly as we were expanding just that one project. If it meant kind of physically moving or there was some kind of perceived risk to their career, they just didn't want to post. And so I don't really think that the early promotions for me came from being necessarily the smartest or the best at what I did. It was just, being a willing, participant in that growth and kind of riding that growth wave and being the right fit at the right time. So I had some really early success on that UPS project. I presented a study to the senior management at Teletech and also the client, the UPS client, on a way to improve the process for quality assurance, and got some notice right away. And there was an opportunity to then go and work with the corporate team in Denver. And so, that was really the first. I had only been with Teletech for it was about 8 or 9 months. It was a pretty quick run, and then suddenly I found myself at home one night after work, asking Holly if she would be interested in moving to Denver. And that was a big move for us. I mean, Tucson was a relatively small town. My wife grew up in Louisville, Kentucky. And so she also wasn't necessarily, someone who had that kind of experience of living in a big, metropolitan, city. We had been living in Tucson for, at that time, it was 6 or 7 years. There was a bit of a discomfort around moving to a new place and having to kind of start from scratch. And so we did that, and again, it was kind of like it became a bit like a heroin drip. The next opportunity that presented itself was to move to the East Coast, and I worked on a big project with Citibank, actually creating one of the very first virtual banks. So we picked up and moved at the time, my son was 1 year old, picked up our lives, moved to a whole new place. And then there was an opportunity later on to go back and work, after working in the field for some time, to go back and work in corporate for doing kind of U.S. shared services and quality assurance and process improvement and workforce management and reporting and analytics. And that required me to have to go and spend lots of time all over the U.S., Canada, and then eventually turned into some international assignments. That opportunity also, as the company was expanding rapidly internationally, there were some acquisitions, international acquisitions. I was sent to, one of my very first international assignments was flying to Spain to do a assessment of business there that we were acquiring. I did this in the UK. I did this in Mexico. I did some assessments of some other companies that had operations in the U.S. And again, it just kind of fit into what I had been hoping at throughout the early part of my career, which was to have these opportunities to meet new people and experience new places, etc. And so I had a trip to the Philippines. Actually, I spent a lot of time in India. I did the assessment of Teletech's acquisition, or it was actually a joint venture, kind of modified joint venture with Bharti Telecommunications. I did that assessment, so spent a lot of time in India. And then shortly after, it was actually 3 weeks after 9/11, I flew in to do an assessment of the Philippines market. And I had developed a good working relationship with Ken Tuckman at the time.
Who is the
CEO of Teletech. And there was, right after the trip to the Philippines, I remember having a conversation with Ken where I was giving a little bit of a debrief on my view on the markets. And I just simply said to him, look, if there was ever an opportunity to go and work in a market like India or the Philippines, sign me up. I'm really interested in an international assignment. And so, that I think was probably the this kind of the spark around, kind of getting into that part of my career, going and moving around the world and setting up contact center operations and running them. I think it all kind of came from that progression of just, not only wanting to experience new things, but just kind of raising my hand and saying, hey, I'm willing to, to do it. And I was really lucky that, my wife was supportive. She wasn't always excited about some of those opportunities, but she was always supportive, and she kind of helped fuel that forward.
Sure. And so for people who don't know that maybe the U.S. geography, these are big moves. When you started on the West Coast in Arizona, then moved into the interior mountain, if I picture it, of Denver, and over to the East Coast on the other side, these are big moves.
Yeah.
Your wife and you have to adjust a lot. And then with you flying around the world, your wife also needs to be, comfortable and able to continue on, with the family.
Yeah.
So you say, Craig, that your big success, I mean, I know it's more than what you're letting on, but two key things were, one, being with a growing company, and then two, putting your hand up to say, I will do it, whatever, it requires, any new projects, travel, whatever. So this was key. So you would recommend then to younger people who want to build your careers. I mean, I'm sure there's more than that, but those are key things. What else would you also add to that list, perhaps?
Well, yeah. I mean, look. I think you're right. It was not. It wasn't really as simple as that. I mean, there were when I had done the assessment of the Philippines market and of the India market, that was on the back of developing a reputation, a delivery reputation around, the work product, was a big part of that. I mean, I wouldn't have been sent to a market like the Philippines to launch that market for $1.5 billion company if I wasn't able to demonstrate that I would be could be successful in doing that. But I do think I think it was a big there was a big part of just I don't want to call it self-promotion, but kind of marketing myself and understanding that I needed to I really needed to make sure that I was clear. I understood what the expectations were of me. That was first. But being really clear where I was comfortable kind of stretching myself and working with my peers as well as my bosses to kind of plan out that that succession, where those opportunities were. I mean, I had conversations over a period of years with, and I didn't work for Ken directly. I was several levels below Ken at the time. But actually, my recollection is that the executive that was responsible for the hiring decision for the Philippines had actually offered someone else the job. I think that person even traveled to the Philippines for a look and see trip. So the reason that this kind of happened was because I had a series of conversations with, with leadership over the years. I had delivered, and when the decision, came, I think, I'm fairly certain, but I know for a fact, it was Ken, who basically said to the guy who I was working for, I think Craig is ready, and he's the guy who I think is the best fit, and I know he's interested in this. There's no question. He's not doing this because he just wants more money or he wants the title. He wants to do this because he's expressed for a long time this is something in his career path that he wants to do. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I think there's a part of this that I would express, and advise anyone who is looking at moving into an executive role as part of their career. I think you're it's not just going to happen. You're not going to just suddenly be tapped and said, hey, we think that you're the right guy. There's some work that you have to do around communicating and marketing, and obviously delivering.
Sure. Okay. Well, if we can step back, then your first trips to Philippines. Now, you said that was in 2001, was it, or maybe early 2022?
Yeah, the first trip I did to the Philippines was in early October of 2001. It was literally right after the commercial. We were supposed to go earlier, and then after things started to settle down following 9/11.
Now, Craig, in those days, this was shortly after the Asian financial crisis, which those older guys remember. At the time, they had recently kicked out a president, Estrada. So it was a very disruptive time. But yet you saw something. I mean, there was many people who were coming to Philippines at the time. Many went back home again and never came. But you thought it was an opportunity. How did you see that? Because at the time there was still a lot of protests on a weekly basis up and down the main Ayala Boulevard of what did you see at the time that was different?
Yeah, I mean, I was really blown away at. I mean, the infrastructure was not necessarily there, but you could see that there was a huge opportunity, and I was mostly blown away by the people. I had not really understood the level of the kind of the affinity to Western culture. I didn't understand that because I was quite young, and like most people, I don't know that I really even knew where the Philippines was, until I had started to investigate it as a market. But I think it was this kind of innate service culture that you kind of ran into everywhere within the Philippines market. The language skills I thought were outstanding. Again, and this is for context. This was in comparison to having spent many months in India, where I was blown away at how smart people were in India. But I really struggled with how that was going to be a big voice market for the U.S. Early on, because frankly, I thought the accents and the communication skills were really lagging in India, but I didn't see that in the Philippines. Now, I think you know, Richard, that at that time there were maybe 15,000 people that were working in the contact center industry. And everything was, for the most part, being operated out of three areas. There was, Eastwood City had really kind of just started to emerge, and it was Makati, and it was Ortigas, Center. But it was those three, and that was it. And one of the first things that we did, and I was a big proponent of, was we built the first dedicated Teletech facility in what has now become a big big area, but it was down at Mall of Asia before Mall of Asia existed. We were in one of the very first SM buildings, was Building F, down just past Rojas Boulevard, and that was like unheard of. We had a number of clients early on that could not understand what we were doing, and because the thought process was, if you weren't in Makati or Ortigas Center, you were not going to have access to to the right level of personnel, or even there were questions whether PLDT would be able to provide the infrastructure. And this is as is not very far from from Makati, but it was really kind of greenfield, and I think that was the thing for me that really got me excited, was that there's the story about the shoe salesman that
Sure.
that was sent to Africa. This company had sent. This is probably such a terrible fake story, but I think it's a good anecdote. But there was a shoe salesman that was sent to Africa. Comes back and says, this is not a market that we're going to be successful in. Nobody wears shoes. And then another, shoe salesman is sent out and comes back and enthusiastic, saying, this is going to be a fantastic market for us. Nobody wears shoes. And I think the Philippines, to me, was very similar. I think that there was a cautious optimism, but for me, I just saw this being the place. Again, I was there at the right time, but it just seemed to me like it was the place to really take advantage of the market dynamics, and the fact that most of the competitors early on had not really figured out that you could access and tap into that talent pool outside of those three metro centers. And that's what we did. Again, as you know, that was a big part of the success, was not building in Makati. I've never actually in my career, even fast forward, I've actually never built a facility in Makati. In the Philippines, all the facilities that I've built have been outside. So,
yeah. Well, if I can just add some for people, watching from outside the country, Makati is the central business district and the place where it makes perfect sense that that's where you would go to set up. And Craig, you became credited as the guy who started this, put your call center on top of a shopping center idea, which was an insane model that nobody believed in at the time. It has now become the standard model because young people who tend to work at call centers love earning money during the night and then going shopping during the day. And it was a big opportunity for them. So whether it's, there was other people involved, but you are credited for the start of that. So it was a big change to the industry, and it really exploded then after this, because everybody knows Filipinos love to shop, and SM and other companies were building so many shopping centers, and it was an ideal thing to put a call center on top. So just giving people some background on that, and that was, I would say, in the legacy of Craig Reines, I think that would be one of the headlines there for you, Craig. Now,
well, thank you for that. I want to make sure that I'm giving credit where credit is due. You know, that was really the model that that Ken had in the U.S. And I was able to, again, it kind of takes some of the conversation we've been having, I think, in a in a good direction, because there's an element here to you you kind of learn from from your mentors, and you adapt some of those strategies, and that was a model that had been very successful in tier 2 and tier 3 cities in the US for Ken, which I had been very involved in. I'd spent many years working with him to establish these these domestic US contact centers using that model. And it was just being able to adapt that in this new market. I thank you for the kind words. I think it wouldn't have been successful, though, if the people hadn't delivered, because I wasn't the guy who, I didn't make that thing, actually happen. I kind of put the idea out there, and then worked with the team to really make that model come to fruition. And so I think the success of that model is really a testament to the fact that the Filipino employees that we brought in early on really kind of took that and ran with it. And and I just feel really quite humbled that that I was there at that time and part of it, part of the success.
Okay. Yes, I understand. Being a leader, sometimes you can take credit for what other people do. But remember, if it had not have worked, then all fingers would have been pointing at you as well, right? So you got to remember that. Now, you mentioned Ken Tuckman, and for people who don't know, very highly regarded guy. When he started his business, it was out of a trailer, I heard.
His garage.
A garage. And became a bona fide billionaire. There's only, 150 or so of these guys in the world. So a tremendous effort and a tremendous career. Also, now I've met the guy once, and he has a reputation for being a demanding guy. No surprise there. When you build a $1 billion fortune from scratch, you're going to be a demanding person. But how did you ended up working closely with him because your success in Philippines? How do you work with a demanding, difficult boss? He's building a business, and it's not easy to work for such people. How do you do that and not be driven insane, Craig? What's your advice there?
Well, Ken, I worked for Ken for almost 15 years, and I began to interact with him very early in my career. I later reported to him when I ran Asia Pacific and EMEA. But he's a classic entrepreneur, and he started the business in his garage in Southern California. It was the whole thing there was he was selling ad space for used car lots, and he turned that into one of the largest global business process outsourcing companies in the world. Teletech was the most successful IPO of 1996. It still remains a public company, but there's a private ownership component. I mean, he still owns the majority of the shares, and I think when you look at this environment, I mean, Ken is the company, and the company is Ken. And Teletech has a very unfortunate reputation of being a revolving door for senior executives. And I think, I witnessed this many times where a senior leader was hired from outside the business and immediately tried to establish that they were hired by Ken because they were smarter than everyone else, including Ken. Their demise really unfolded over a series of meetings where they would attempt to position their reputation and their experience as market leading and establish that Ken had hired them into this leadership position to fix all the company's ills. And these individuals, I think, quickly lost trust, not only amongst their subordinates, but they never really established trust with Ken. And so you would see this very, very quickly. There would be lots of headbutting, with Ken, with peers, with subordinate. And, Ken is brilliant. I mean, he's also, I'd say, and I view him very positively, but there's an arrogance there as well. And which is absolutely deserved. I mean, what he's built is quite incredible. And every time you would sit down to discuss a deal with him, he has 1,000 changes and ideas on how to make that deal better. And most of these senior executives simply did not like that their ideas were constantly being torn apart. So, I mean, I think having grown up in the business, I joined right before the company went IPO. And so I think growing up in that, I had a bit of an advantage. I developed a bit of a loyalty, certainly an admiration for what Ken had built. He put me, and I do credit him for putting me in progressively more challenging roles and situations. I don't believe I would have had those anywhere else. And so, I mean, I think that part of it for me was that there was this trust, that this mutual trust that was developed, and I thoroughly enjoyed the time I worked for him. Yes, I mean there were times when very stressful. I felt under the gun many times. I certainly made mistakes, and he made sure that I knew, when I had made mistakes. But there was just never really a dull moment, and fast forward. I really only work with people that I trusted. When I left Teletech, I became a client. And again, I don't know that I would have necessarily, had I gone through a different path and not developed a trust with Ken. I don't know that necessarily would have been the same path. So I think, again, for the purposes of, of our discussion here, I think there needs to be an open line of communication between the CEO, members of the senior management team. There has to be this kind of promotion of free exchange of ideas, and the ability to kind of deal with issues as they arise. And there's a division of responsibility, coordination of how, of the strategy, the tactics, and the strategy to succeed, to achieve success. And I think it starts with that kind of building of trust and respect amongst the management team, which also comes from setting clear expectations. But I think in order to deliver against those expectations, you have to have that very open communication with the with across the whole leadership team. And I think that was maybe where I was the most successful, with Ken and with my career at Teletech, and why some people have a really hard time getting kind of coming into that circle of trust.
Yeah, it's hard to get anything done, even with the smartest people, if there isn't trust, and it's not easy to build. So, okay, that's good advice. Now, Craig, maybe go on a different path, but you worked in quite a few countries. Could you just quickly describe? I know South Africa, the UK. I can't. Well, maybe first, if you just tell us, which countries have you worked in?
So I've worked in the U.S. Obviously, I've worked in Canada. I've worked a little bit in Mexico, but didn't actually move, but spent a lot of time in Mexico as well. Philippines, China, Hong Kong, South Korea. Spent a lot of time in South Korea. Malaysia, spent a lot of time in Malaysia as well. Australia, New Zealand, South Africa. Went to look seriously and spent some time in Kenya. Did a really interesting project in Ghana just before I left Teletech. Two markets that I also think very highly of. South Africa, I think very highly of as well. The UK, which included Northern Ireland, France, Spain, a little bit in Germany, and then spent a little bit of time in the Caribbean. Spent some time in Barbados, actually with a partner there, and then Central America, El Salvador El Salvador and South America, Argentina, and Colombia are the markets where I've spent a fair amount of time.
Okay, so it's a bit more than I thought, because I was going to ask you to go through some of the differences in these countries and whether, when you work at senior levels, whether the differences, people talk about the differences between Americans, management in France and these kinds of, are these differences, overly apparent or are they overly stated? What do you think about that?
Well, I think there is a big difference. I mean, I worked for Europeans with Vodafone as well as Sitel. Sitel. When I joined Sitel, it was U.S. owned, a publicly listed company, and was acquired by a French company. And I've also worked for Asians. When I worked at Vodafone in Australia, that was a joint venture between Hutchison Whampoa and Vodafone. So they are very different, and I think I want to be a little bit careful in how I describe this, but I think the big difference comes from the executives themselves and their individual management styles.
Yeah.
The U.S. executives that have not lived and worked overseas, they tend to, I think, lean towards thinking, really believing that the U.S. is really the best, the best at kind of everything. It's kind of the center of the universe, and that I think that's a filter which I think can be challenging, especially when you're an executive working for kind of running one of these international markets and working for someone that may not necessarily understand the market, the local market dynamics, and so I think a big difference with like when I worked for Sitel and the leadership changed after the acquisition. You had a French CEO and a French COO, which really appreciated and understood that the local market had to be, like, the decisions had to be made and had to be executed by the local market team because they knew best. And I see that with very similar in the U.S. In Asia. I think there's a little bit of that in Asia as well. I think there is a deferral to local experts to run those local markets. The U.S., that's not really the case. I think you hear this time and time again that if the headquarters is a U.S.-based headquarters and the executives are U.S.-based executives, again, that don't have necessarily international experience, a lot of decisions are made out of the U.S. and that can be a challenge, to the success of those local markets.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some Germans and so forth who think they're the best as well. In other countries, I won't mention. Also, I don't think only the Americans, but I would say most people in the world would consider American management to be. So it's a bit of. I think it goes both ways, Craig. But I appreciate your diplomatic and a very good way to look at things. Now, you talked about the Sitel organization, and this was where you've been most recently. And this was a big success for, the global market. Philippines, certainly 25,000 people. So that means you had, between Sitel and Teletech, there's 50,000 people employed in Philippines that you had a hand, a bona fide hand in creating with other people. But for the Sitel role, how did you find yourself chosen for that one and on your way back to Philippines? What was the circumstances?
Yeah, I had kind of, again, through the network, I had made through my network, I had made it clear that if there was an international opportunity, I was interested in pursuing it. At the time, I was working for doing some corporate development and strategic advisory to a company called CallMiner, which is in the speech analytics space, a company that I had been a client of a couple times, and I through a colleague. I came to find out that Sitel and Bert Quintana, who was the CEO at the time, was looking for someone to come in and manage the Philippines and business and expand back into Asia. And so I was lucky enough. Bert sits on the board of REI. I was living in Seattle at the time, and he was in town for a board meeting, and I met him down at the airport. And what was supposed to be kind of a 30-minute coffee, meet and greet turned into a 3.5-hour conversation, yeah. Which was really, it was really exciting. Kind of what he was looking for, what he wanted to do in that market, and I it just felt like it was a good fit, for what I wanted at the time. I think also, just from a personal perspective, my daughter was concluding middle school. She was getting ready to go into high school, and both of my kids, for most of their grade school careers, had gone to school overseas. She had communicated an interest in studying abroad during high school, and I think the planets kind of aligned, in the right configuration, and it just seemed like a really good fit. And look, I mean, I've shared with many people. I don't purport to have had a perfect record in my first run in the Philippines. There were lots of things that if I had an opportunity for a do-over, I would have done. And this was like, gosh, I mean, how many times you get a chance to to go back and have a do-over, in some of these areas.
Oh, I see.
And it was it was a lot of fun. I mean, I as you said, I think a lot of respect for Sitel as an organization, and I'm really humbled with the with that experience to help work with that team and grow it to what became about 25,000 employees, and we opened a number of new markets in the Philippines that again, most of the competition hadn't really thought about seriously, and we were very successful, and I feel really good about that choice in career path, and I would do it again, without question.
Sure. Yeah, it's something. I know in your organizations, you've always been a guy who wanted to, with your team, to go into these new areas. And just for again, people from outside the country who don't see this, but the impact that a center like a Sitel or a Teletech center has on a community, where you're going in one year and it looks like, the third world. It's not a nice way to put it, but we're underdeveloped, no restaurants, no jobs for young people and so forth. And then just a year later, after one of these centers goes in, you see a flowering of prosperity, of opportunities for young people. Oh, it's just a tremendous transformation that we both have seen. And for people who maybe haven't seen that, it really is inspiring. And I can remember talking to people from the industry, almost in tears, describing the impact that they've had on both their own staff's careers and lives and these communities. So it's kind of a thing like that. I just add that a little bit.
No, Richard, I think you're right. I mean, I look back on some of those successful projects in the provincial locations as being probably some of the most personally rewarding experiences I've had. And I would say it's not just it's really easy to find those experiences in markets like the Philippines, but it's not limited to just the Philippines. I mean, we had, I'm saying we, meaning Holly and I, had an opportunity, even when we lived in South Africa, to do something similar. And it's just, it really is. I mean, it's just kind of an emotional experience that is difficult to describe when you're helping people, families, emerge from poverty and actually develop careers, and then to see people, and I stay in touch with many people that I've worked with around the world, and it's just so personally rewarding to know that you were in some small way a part of really changing that person's life. And I think maybe it sounds a little cheesy, but it's kind of cool to be able to say that you were part of changing history. I mean, some of these impacts were historical. They changed the dynamic of those communities, and they'll never be the same.
Never be the same, Craig. And absolutely, it is changing history. I remember friend of yours, Dan Reyes, him and I years ago talking about when he first went into Baguio, which is a city in the northern mountains. And he was describing how the parents of his employees who were earning incomes that they could never have imagined, even having
Yeah.
a job, was a big surprise. And they would buy him chickens and goats and stuff when they knew that he was coming to town, and describing to this tears, both of us, because of the opportunities and the prosperity that you and Dan and others have helped to create. It really is emotionally fulfilling. I mean, it's a bit sensitive. We don't want to get too carried away, but Craig, we talked about Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, Kenya. What can you say about the opportunity there? Because I've heard similar stories. What do you think? How far away is it, and what is the opportunity there?
Yeah, well, I've been out of that market for almost 10 years now. South Africa is just an amazing place. The infrastructure is first world. The people are incredible.
Okay.
The language skills are really, really strong. And not unlike the Philippines, you have a sincere desire amongst employees to be successful, and with the right management strategy, that market is a really strong market within the customer experience, customer management industry. They clearly have a big advantage from a manufacturing perspective, agricultural. Those are industries which are well entrenched in that market, and they do very well. But services industries, I think, will continue to be very, very successful in South Africa. Kenya and Rwanda, which is another market I didn't mention, are also, I think, very interesting. Rwanda, in particular, I have a kind of a soft spot in my heart. I was really quite lucky to be involved in with an envoy that was brought together by President Kagame to go into the market, and this would have been, again, kind of 11, 12 years ago, to look at opportunities in my area. Of course, was in the customer experience, customer management space when I was with Teletech, and again, that was one where a big credit to Ken Tuckman. Ken had met President Kagame at Davos, and I actually went representing Ken. But Rwanda, just really an amazing market, and where the government has made significant investments in infrastructure, education, just to enable these kind of knowledge worker, type of jobs to be successful. And so, I think there are a few companies that have some telcos, some of the African focused telcos have taken advantage of that market, but I think that's a market that has huge potential. And then Kenya, same thing. I mean, maybe not at the same level yet, but from a people perspective, fantastic market. Infrastructure starting to really the telecommunications infrastructure really starting to kind of come into its own, and I think that I think that market will continue to be a really interesting market. And then the other market, Nigeria is just a huge. Nigeria is kind of like an animal in and of itself. I mean, it's so large, and people don't really understand. I mean, it's the size of the U.S. in terms of population, and there is so much going on in Nigeria. The challenge with Nigeria is there still is a fair amount of corruption, and so you have to be able to navigate that, and that may be a little too risky for some people. But again, from an infrastructure perspective, fantastic. People perspective, fantastic, and certainly tons of opportunities there. And then Ghana, I really liked Ghana. It was again, just the people, infrastructure still needs some work, but again, at least 10 years ago, and from what I've read and have followed, there's just been so much investment put into infrastructure that I think that's another market that would be very successful, moving forward. It's just the challenge with markets like Ghana is that the population is relatively small in comparison to some of the other competing markets, and so and language, there's a much smaller population of fluent English speakers, but it's growing, and that's mainly based on the fact that the government has made, and similar to Rwanda, has made lots of investment in the schools, and so for the most part, the education is English, and so there's I think a big push. Similar to what happened in the Philippines, a really big push to expand the English language, services industry by improving the language capabilities of the workers in those markets. I think that's a smart move.
It is, yeah. Okay. Well, Craig, maybe we could ask a bit about just you as a person. I mean, how would you describe yourself? Do you think of yourself as introverted or extroverted? Were you good at school or not? Did you follow the rules? Were you rebellious, a bit of a problem when you were a teenager? How would you describe yourself with these kinds of attributes?
Yeah, I think I would call myself an extrovert.
Okay.
I wasn't a big fan of rules. I mean, I did spend my fair share of time in the principal's office. But I was also an Eagle Scout, and I was a senior patrol leader, Order of the Arrow. I actually owe a lot of my leadership skill development, my public speaking, organizational management from Boy Scouts and other youth groups that I was involved in.
Nice.
I had an interest in becoming an astronaut, when I was very young, and I think that was probably part of the motivation. Just to follow, the rules to a certain extent. It was kind of a means to an end. Not a bad thing, but I think that was probably part of what was going through my mind. I was really never interested in school, and I ultimately gave up on the astronaut path really when it became clear that my grades weren't going to support that. And university was a little bit different. I aced astronomy, behavioral sciences, political science courses, especially really enjoyed constitutional law and philosophy. But I wouldn't stretch to call myself a good student. And I really only enjoyed classes that I had interesting teachers. For example, I always liked science and technology, but the first science class that I can even remember, actually really the only science class that I can remember enjoying, was in high school because of the teacher. And I don't even remember what it was. It must have been chemistry, just thinking of the timing. But this was a gentleman who he spent time understanding us as students. What really interested us, really, and he tapped into that. I mean, I remember he somehow convinced a group of my friends to launch a science club. Now, I wouldn't say I was the most popular, kid in high school, but I would never in a million years have thought to go and convince friends, to put together a group of nerds, to join a science club. But, really the reason that happened was he promised, the teacher promised that we could have guest speakers come in. And he kind of walked through, we started pushing him on this, like, well, what kind of guest speakers? And so he connected us with, with some various speakers, and then he gave us the latitude to really open up the opportunities. But we had a Navy salvage diver, who came in and told us about all of his experiences diving on wrecks and recovering bodies, and had pictures and brought equipment and stuff. We had a cryogenics expert who came in, with a big vat of liquid nitrogen and was, dipping stuff into the, musicians. So this is something I think I realized, kind of came to realize early on that, there's an element here of when you're dictated to, I think people naturally want to rebel. I think it's a very natural reaction. But when you're brought along for the ride and you are given an opportunity to participate in establishing the rules, given some responsibility for maintaining the rules, you honor them, even if you don't necessarily agree with them. And it's something I've kind of understood more and more over the years. And that was a big part of Boy Scouts. I was so unhappy that at the time Boy Scouts were the national Boy Scout leadership was very clear about their views on gays, on homosexuality, and very anti homosexuals, and that bugged me terribly. And there was also an element of, I'm not an overly religious person, but I am a spiritual person, but when the Boy Scouts made a big case, there was a case in the 80s with a young man who refused to say that he believed in God, and so they wouldn't award him the Eagle Scout award because of that. And a big deal. It may even have been a legal case at the time. And again, those things really bug me. So I didn't necessarily always agree with the rules, but there was something about being part of the process, of participating in the management and maintenance of the values that the kind of shared common values that we did agree on, and kind of helping to perpetuate that, which I think has carried forward, for me into my career. I also just remember, just thinking back on teachers and kind of some early experiences that kind of formed my just who I am. There was a history teacher that I had, really difficult class, very, very high expectations of students. He had been in an accident some years before, and I don't remember the whole story, but he had some pretty significant physical challenges, and he had a prosthetic arm, and it was the old style prosthetic arm that has the mechanical hook. And he was tough. No nonsense, a little scary. I remember not being happy when I got assigned to his class, but he was a runner, and he was the coach for the track and cross country team. And I was actually pretty good at track, and so I had been on the track team before I joined his class, and so he knew me before I took his class. And I don't think I did very well in history, but I really had a lot of respect for how he had overcome his disability.
Yeah.
He was a great coach outside of the classroom, and he really brought out the best in everyone on the team, and really tried hard to bring out the best in students in the classroom. And I had never run cross country. I'd only done track, or really hadn't really done any real distance running. And so I was looking for an excuse not to do it when he came to me and asked if I would join the cross country team in the semester after track and field. And so I made up some excuse that I couldn't join the team because I had a job commitment after school. I don't remember the whole thing, but he convinced me, I remember this so clearly, that I had the rest of my life to work and to not waste the opportunity to try something new at this point in my life. And I kind of think back on this now, and again, it just layers on. It was like, yeah, I get that. When the opportunity presents itself, don't just fall back into something that's just comfortable, a comfortable, safe space. You got to kind of take risks and try new things. So anyway, I think in terms of kind of who I am and what makes me tick, I think it just comes from this this layered set of experiences where I just I've never been a big big fan of being dictated to, and I try very hard as a leader to bring people along for the ride, and also not be just in a dictatorial kind of mode, because I don't think that's a way to be successful and engage with with people. It certainly hasn't been successful with me.
Okay. And well, Craig, now there's a lot of talk about nature versus nurture when it comes to leadership, CEOs, these kinds of things. What do you think it takes both, I would say. You've had a interesting upbringing, opportunities and so forth, but you also had an inner urge to lead, excel. What do you think is the relationship or percentages? Is it more nature, meaning your genes, what you're born with, or is it more the nurturing you get? What do you think?
Look, I think that I think that people, it's more of a will versus skill thing for me. I don't think people are necessarily born with a leadership gene. I think they're made, and I think people. What I've seen in my experience is that you can be technically brilliant, but your cultural approach, your style, it's just a mismatch. And it doesn't mean that you would be necessarily a bad leader, a bad chief executive. It just may not be the best fit for that particular set of circumstances. So I think personal success is, especially when it comes to to kind of leadership, is I think it's learned behaviors that get brought together in a particular way, where you are these are tools in your toolkit that you can pull out at the appropriate time to be successful. But it's I've never seen anyone be successful as a leader if they don't recognize how important it is for those interpersonal relationships with peers, with your boss, with your subordinates, and really having that fit. And developing, that, again, back to the point that I made earlier, that the mutual trust, amongst your peers, and that I think becomes learning to operate within that environment of mutual trust is, I think, what really foments the success for a leader.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. And now, when you are hiring people or promoting people, I know you do a lot of both, but probably more recently it's promoting, because I don't know whether you get involved with the grassroots but what do you look for in people that you want to have in your organization?
Yeah, I think, again, and getting back to, I think it's a will versus skill thing for me, and again, this just may be my my own personal slant. I can train someone on the mechanical elements of the business, and I can even, to a certain extent, guide and coach on attitude, but I can't force someone to want to be successful. So I'm looking for that spark and that drive to be the best. They don't need to demonstrate that they are the best on paper, or give me examples of where they can demonstrate that they've been top of their class, or the employee of the month or whatever. But I think there's an element of understanding where the person is coming from, what how their kind of personal view on what it takes to be successful, how they view their role, as in the organization, whether they're being hired into a leadership role, or as a staffer. I think it's really that willingness to want to be successful. I think there's an element of passion, which I would say is also part of that. That I'm always looking for. Communication, skills. Being a good communicator is absolutely critical. I think back on what is so often misunderstood. When you're looking for someone that is a good communicator, feedback is an absolutely critical part. And accepting feedback, processing feedback, listening, and processing is a really important part of being a good communicator. And I find people that are, you can tell quite quickly, someone that is really just one way, and doesn't necessarily have the willingness, because again, I don't think it's a skill thing. I think it's you can be trained, but they don't really have the willingness to accept to accept feedback. Yeah, I think that's going to be a real challenge. Yeah. So I think those are the big things. Passion for me, it comes across in many different ways, but that fit element is a multi-dimensional thing, which it's going to be slightly different based on the type of role that that I would be hiring for, and even the organization that I'm working for. But again, there's that element of just wanting to be successful, wanting to the drive to be successful. And there's one other thing, Richard, as I'm kind of thinking about this, it's humbleness. It's recognizing and acting like you're not the most important person in the room. Being willing to understand that being part of a team is a participative process. There are gives and takes, and that everyone has to feel like they're valued and they're coming along for the ride, and that there's going to be some shared success, and there's also going to be some shared failures, and just being humble and understanding that, you're not the savior. As I mentioned in my little anecdote, earlier about some of the experiences I had seeing executives that were not successful within the Teletech organization. I think that was a big part of it, is that, if you come in kind of guns a-blazing, I'm the new sheriff in town, you're just never going to be successful. And I have had many people that I have not, that were, again, on paper were probably the best candidate, but I didn't hire them because it was just very clear that they were going to be a fit mismatch because of their approach.
Okay. Now, that's interesting you mentioned that, because hiring from outside the organization, it's often difficult, though, to tell. I mean, someone might put on a good front that they have passion, they have willpower, they have all these humbleness, but it's very hard to tell in a series of interviews whether that's the case or what. I mean, after your many years of experience, you've hired thousands of people over here. Do you feel comfortable you can often assess those things, or is it just get them in, try it? If they don't, then you gotta get them out.
Yeah, I've maybe this is not the most scientific way to hire people, but I just find the chemistry is really important, and so I will tend. I'm a firm believer that people naturally want to be successful. And when they come into work, they naturally want to be successful. They're not trying to defraud you, from the beginning. And obviously people will put on the best possible dog and pony show they can in the interview process. But I tend to assume that they're the best of intentions, and to me it's been pretty easy to kind of identify problem areas or potential problem areas, based on the conversation we've just had. So I would default to giving someone a chance. The approach that I've always taken is that there's a probationary period, in any new employment relationship, and that probationary period is as much about me and the organization assessing that person as it is for that person to assess the organization. And so I have just found in many cases that when it turns out that the person was misrepresenting their their belief system or their values, or kind of the way that they would approach things, I think that comes out very, very early in the in their tenure. And so again, I've had more success with people that were really motivated to learn, to accept feedback, they bought into the concept of I am part of the team, and I'm going to be part of the solution. I'm not going to. I wasn't hired to single-handedly lead the solution, or not lead the solution, but deliver the solution. I think that the technical capabilities of the person, even if they have some failings in those those skills, I think it's something that can be worked through. But again, I can't fix it when the person just doesn't want to be successful because they have some ulterior motive or they don't really have the passion to be successful, and they're just doing it because they're just trying to make a pay. They just want the money, or they just want the title. That's where where I have found people have not been good hires. And I have I've had my fair share of hiring mistakes, for sure. But they've always kind of worked themselves out, as I said, pretty quickly. I cannot think of a situation where I had someone who was just a disaster that that ended up sticking in that role for years and years. It just kind of worked itself out.
Okay. So the will to be successful, this is a key thing for you when you hire people. This would be advice that you would give people in terms of their education. You seem you've had a kind of a broad education yourself. Would you recommend that for others, or is there certain areas to focus on and not focus on, like English literature or fine arts, as opposed to engineering and computer science? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that it's a tough one, because I think it just depends on the individual. Again, as I said, I was not necessarily a good student. I have a reasonable educational background, but I don't think that my success, and certainly when people hire me, or I'm in an interview situation, I'm not hired because of my educational background. No. So I think it's a mix. There are, if I was hiring someone to be a Cisco engineer, well, yes, I'm expecting someone has the appropriate certifications, but I would still be looking for real world experience, and if they were being hired into a management role, all those same behaviors that we were just discussing would be really critical. But I would hire someone with many years of business experience and no formal academics over a multiple degree holder with limited experience all day long.
Sure.
And I'll just say, I think back on, some of my mentors. Let's take Ken Tuckman, for example. Ken Tuckman doesn't have a college degree.
I see.
Gentleman who I worked with for many years and still stay in touch with, didn't have a college degree, but was a very successful senior executive. There are so many examples of people that I have I've looked up to and have worked with, that the academic part was just it was maybe one of the layers, but it wasn't the primary layer of what made them successful.
Yep. Okay, fair enough. Well, look, we can move to your health issues. You, like many people at senior levels, you work long hours. Sometimes health can suffer. Now, do you have special food and exercise programs that you try to follow, and are you able to follow them? What are your advice to others about that?
Yeah, I have to say, I have not been very good about this in most of my career. I did last year. I was not feeling well. About 2 years ago is when I started to really realize that I was not feeling well. I was not eating well. I was not sleeping well, and it started to materialize as some relatively serious health issues, and I think it impacted my kind of mental state as well. I had been an athlete, in high school and college. I had run a fair bit since I was a teenager, and so I I had never really been the type of person who liked to go to the gym, and lift weights. It just was not something that I could kind of get my head around. But I did start running again last year, pretty seriously, and I had the benefit of getting some advice from a number of former colleagues on just their people that have been in similar situations and how they had approached it. I did have a bit of a health scare. I was diabetic. I have hypertension, high blood pressure. My indicators in a number of areas were very, very concerning. My mother passed away many years ago. Similar kind of health-related issues. My father passed away last year, a year and a half ago now. Again, kind of similar issues, and so some of this is genetics, and I came to understand that. But I learned through my healthcare provider and through colleagues and friends that I trust that nutrition and exercise are really so incredibly important. And so I kind of took up a personal challenge, to train and run the marathon in November of 2020.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really pretty interesting, that process of just going through the things that that worked for me, that I learned worked for me. I haven't materially changed the type of food that I eat, but I am just more aware and quantities of food, and also when I eat, and avoiding situations where I'm stress eating, and the exercise piece. I was always active, but I had thought that you really have to put in a solid hour of high intensity activity on a daily basis to really have any impact on exercise, and that's just not true. I had learned through the experience that just walking and just being active and not being sedentary, just these behavioral changes have a profound effect on your mental well-being and your physical well-being. And so within 4 or 5 months after changing some of these behaviors last year, I'm actually cured of diabetes. I do not have diabetes anymore. I will probably always have high blood pressure, but it is well under control. I did have high cholesterol. My cholesterol is the lowest it's ever been in my life. I sleep. My sleep patterns and the quality of my sleep is much improved over what it was. I had sleep apnea. I've lost 30 pounds, and so just my whole kind of just view of my life has really changed with, frankly, some pretty minor changes that I've made to how I eat and how I exercise. And so I think it's I believe that I'm going to continue to maintain the same kind of approach, because it's not challenging to me, and I'm not I haven't taken some drastic step which was difficult to maintain. It's been on my pace, based on lots of informed discussions with people that I trust and value their insights. But really, I mean, it was me. It was getting back to the conversation that we were having earlier. Like that spark, was lit outside, but certainly wasn't. I don't think I was born with it. I think I developed the spark, but it's really been up to me to have that motivation and that willingness to continue to maintain that regimen and those behaviors. And so, long way, like I know, very long-winded way of saying, I think that health is, and maintaining your health is incredibly important, especially when you get to a senior level in your career, and it probably needs to be something that is at the top of the list. Now, when I'm thinking about hiring new people, I'm actually thinking about this as part of the fit, right? Someone who does not recognize the importance of health in their whole being, and doesn't have to necessarily have examples of being of doing those things, or having the skills yet but the willingness to understand and be prepared to embrace some behavioral changes to maintain their health, I think is maybe another one to add to the list of what I would be looking for in a hire. And I think it's a really, really important part of the overall person and their success, because look, you can't be successful if you're dead. And I think it's a really, really understated and under-discussed part of what it is to be a successful executive, and certainly a successful leader.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So that's a good story. So anybody listening, a lot of people do get themselves into medical things, especially as you get, the age that we are, I won't say our age, but, mid 40s, early 50s, it really catches up with people. So there is not just hope, but there is very clear things you can do to turn yourself right around like you have. So that's quite an achievement, Craig.
But Richard, you and I are, we're late 20s. What are you talking about?
I know, well, I'm not, Craig. You have the mindset. I'm telling you, I am not. I feel I'm getting old. I'm a couple of years older than you, but
you exercise, and this is something you're one of the people that I would say it was part of my journey, was talking to people like you and getting your take on this was really helpful. And I think it's, again, I don't want to like overdo it, but I think this is something that I don't think it's taboo, but I think people tend to shy away from it in, in discussions. And I think it was really helpful. I remember having a conversation with you kind of very early on as I had encountered some of these health related issues, and I was kind of trying to figure out what the right approach was for me. And I think that's a really important part of the process of having having success is really tapping into that network of colleagues and family and friends that that have experiences that that you can discuss and share. Again, whether it's health related or not, but I think the health piece is really something that we don't talk about as much as we probably should.
Yeah, it is improving, it seems, but you're right. A lot of people don't talk about it enough. But anyway, children, raising children, that's another thing people don't talk about as much as maybe they could. You've been very successful, it seems to me, with your kids. I'm sure, during the teen years was a challenge, natural thing. But you also, maybe your wife Holly also has a lot to say about this one too. But what do you think about, what are some of the tips you would have to other younger leaders who are, balancing a high demanding role and raising children? What are some of the, more than just tips, but the strategies or things you've learned about that?
Yeah, this is an area where I don't think I was very very good. I think that I tended to put my professional priorities over some of my family priorities for many years, especially early in my career, and I regret that significantly. I think I have a great relationship with both of my kids. We've been lucky. These international experiences were, to a certain extent, I think it was a bit of a crutch, because we were together, we were having these shared experiences, and so I think that was really helpful in keeping us together as a family unit. But my advice, without going down a sob story on myself, I think my advice to people that are raising children, especially young children, is you kind of like health. I mean, you have to come up with an approach that includes sufficient time to just be present with your kids. And if the job is if you believe that the job is more important to you than your family is, then I think you have to make a choice. So I don't think it's fair to to children and certainly to spouses to not recognize that at the end of the day, jobs come and go, but the family's always going to be there, and your primary obligation is to is to your family. It's not to your to your work. And I know many people that have come to that that point, and in some cases they not my choice that I would have taken, but in some cases they decide that the job is more important to them, and so they leave their families. But I think it's unfair to to the family and especially to the kids to not be present in in their lives, especially when you're involved in a senior level role, and when you're living for those of us who have lived overseas and on international assignments, totally unfair to not recognize this is important when these people have moved their lives to a foreign country, living in a foreign place, don't have the same kind of social or even professional network that you have. It's just not something that I would advise to take lightly when thinking about accepting an international role.
Yeah, true. I know we always used to say with international roles, it is a family decision. And I know with wives or husband and wives, they always said, or we always noticed that if there's any problem with your wife before you go and you think that an overseas posting is going to solve those, it won't. It will destroy the relationship. So that takes me to wives, because you've had a very successful, long relationship with your wife. Can you just briefly tell us how you first met her and how you came to be married? Did she, kind of put the ultimatum and make you, or was it you who did how did that come about, Craig?
Yeah, well, so we met at the University of Arizona. It was a kind of a funny story. I was dating her roommate at the time, and I met her as we were preparing to go to some kind of a costume party in college, and we didn't particularly hit it off at first, but it's just one of those those situations where I think we talked a few times and got to know each other, and went out on a date. I asked her out on a date, and it just kind of grew from there. I think very early on I realized that there were things about her that I really appreciated, that I had not had in other relationships. She kind of saw some things in me which I had not necessarily identified at that point, or maybe I just wasn't consciously thinking about it. And so there was just this kind of mutual I think appreciation for the strengths and in some cases the quirks that we both had, and it turned into a long-term relationship. We actually lived together for and dated for 6 or 7 years before we ended up getting married, and I think she was really big part of my of kind of participating in my early career development, because a lot of the decisions that that were made, they just weren't made in isolation. They were made, whether it was applying for a particular job or discussing a promotion, or moving to a new I think those decisions were never made in isolation, and there was always that respect for for her and for her feelings when when making that. I'll tell you, the Philippines, the first international posting in the Philippines was, as I mentioned earlier, was really challenging for her. Frankly, it was. I remember my mom didn't talk to me for 2 weeks. She was so mad. So there was an element there of trying to market the opportunity to Holly before we made that decision. And I would not have made the decision if we were lucky enough to be offered the opportunity to fly out to the Philippines. And so we went out, we did a look and see visit, and she kind of came to the realization quickly during that trip that this was something that she could do. She was concerned about security. She was concerned about language. She was concerned about, medical care. We had a 2-year-old. We had a 5.5-year-old and a 2-year-old. When we moved out, she was, she had concern about like, where do you going to the store? Like, well, what buying things. And so I think it was the right choice early on to make sure that she was engaged and participating in the decision, and that's really been the way it's been for all the moves and major career decisions that I've made. They've always had some conversation with her first.
I see. But Craig, I've seen so many marriages, relationships get into a lot of trouble overseas where, the expat, he or she is very actively involved in their business. So they're busy and they're engaged. Whereas the trailing spouse, and now in this case, she's a wife, and I don't want it to seem like it's only the wives that drive the guys crazy, because when the trailing spouses are husbands, I've found that that's more problematic. But often the spouse, the stay-at-home spouse, is isolated. They're at home. They're away from their friends and family. They're, worried about security, like you said, healthcare issues, all these kinds of things that are both unfamiliar and even, dangerous. And yet, so this puts a lot of stress on the expat, because as soon as he gets home, he's barraged with tears and I don't want to stay here and I'm lonely and all these kinds of things. And it really, we used to do a lot of work years ago when we were doing executive search, and a big number of our work was just replacing failed expat postings because of these kinds of reasons. Now, in your situation with Holly, she became involved with the American Chamber of Commerce, maybe women's group, I think it was, and other things. Is this kind of what saved her, or not saved her, but what was her secret to success? What advice would you think you and her could give to other couples considering expat postings?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I have thought back on this many times, especially when I have hired executives with spouses to move overseas. I think the hardest thing for anyone when they're moving to a new place is that the working spouse instantly has a social circle and a network and a support network.
Yep.
And so in the very first move, when we moved to Denver, Holly took it upon herself. I really didn't have anything to do with this, but she took it upon herself to seek out areas where she could start to build a support network. And so I remember my first day working in Denver, she just went and drove around the whole city. just kind of went and investigated things, which is so, because you know my wife, but this is like so not like her. I mean, that's just not her kind of normal inclination. But she forced herself to go out and seek out these new places, and so she did that pretty much everywhere that we had moved within the U.S. And she then took that same approach when she moved to the Philippines. Now, the Philippines, luckily enough, I mean, because there's such a huge expat community, this was not difficult for her to kind of quickly find those support networks. But she did that. She got very involved in the American Women's Club from the outset, and then got involved in some other activities. Also with school, I mean, I think the easiest thing, even when we moved to South Africa and in the UK, there's a community that does exist that I don't think people take advantage of as often as they should with with the schools, with parents that are in similar situations, have children in the schools. And so developing that network there was something that she learned very quickly, really helped her. And I think the advice here is that you need to really ensure that your partner is included in as much of your work experience as possible. I think back on one of my mentors that I mentioned before. His name's Ted Mcmurdo. Just a absolutely fabulous guy, and he's been a mentor of mine for years. He's who hired me initially within Teletech to move to Denver, and I've worked with him in a number of roles. And he was a senior executive at T-Mobile towards the end of his career. Anyway, he and a gentleman by the name of Keith Mason, who was running human resources. He was the head of human resources at Teletech, again on the UPS project. The two of them, when we were shipped to Atlanta at the beginning of that experience. So remember, I moved when I went to do that project. When I was promoted, we moved to Denver, and then for the first 2 months, we moved to. We were living in Tucson, and we moved to Atlanta for 2 months, but without spouses, to go through this training. And one of the things that Ted and Keith did, which was so interesting, and I've used this stolen the strategy multiple times, is they sent a letter to all the spouses or significant others of everyone who had been deployed to Atlanta for this 2 months, thanking their spouse for supporting this, this activity,
Sure.
and reaching out and offering whatever support, telephone number, email address, whatever they needed to, provide, the necessary support if that spouse or significant other had any questions or had any issues. And I think that this is, again, such a mistake that many companies make. And it's not just an international thing. When you have an employee that is moving into in someplace new, the support and the inclusion of that spouse in the experience, I think, goes a really, really long way. And like you, I have many experiences that I've come across where the people did not understand this, or the company did not recognize how important this was. And then the spouse ends up sitting at home, feeling very isolated,
Yeah.
And getting to the point where they simply do not want to stay anymore. because it's just not mentally, healthy, for them. And it's not necessarily a doesn't become a relationship issue initially. It's just that they just feel completely unsupported and feel like they're they're on an island. And I've tried really, really hard to make sure that there's that feeling of, when you talk about, work in the company, establishing or developing this sense of family, amongst your team. Well, that extends to, the partners and significant others, and the children, the aunts and uncles, and again, in the Philippines, this was maybe helped. It was a bit of a crutch, with this, because people are just so culturally attuned to that, that kind of thinking. So it was really easy to get people to recognize that. But for international executives, you just have to. I think you have to go over and above making sure that the spouse is feeling like they're part of the experience and not just an observer.
Yeah. Okay. Very good advice. On the matter of relationships with women. Now, I'm going to say honestly that I am still in the dark as to how their minds work. I've learned some, but still mainly in the dark. Now, but I know men are often accused of being, less able to multitask, and therefore we focus on our work is the stereotype, and it seems to be a true stereotype with me, and less able to, multitask family responsibilities. So now, would you say that your wife has been key to this, or do you say you've really been a full partner with the family? Because I'll say from my perspective, I will give credit to my wife for this. She's very outgoing. I am introverted and have a harder time, with it. But she really has done this, and she will take credit for it too, and so she should. But what's your situation? How do you manage to keep, a strong relationship with your wife? Because they need more of the fuzzy hugs and kisses than we think we do. What can you advise others?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think I don't, take credit at all, for our relationship, being as strong as it is and sticking together. I mean, that was all her. I mean, she's the one who, has really been the glue that's kept everyone together. And, I don't think that, while it is kind of like a two-sided coin. I mean, I think there are elements that we both bring to the relationship, which certainly has made it work. I think it's her. It's kind of her approach, and willingness to call BS on me, and keeping me, it's not so much in check, but keeping me kind of in a path, or within the guardrails. I think has been what's made this work. We've had very difficult times in our relationship. No question, but I think that I don't know if there's anything unique, about her. I think it's just that we've had this shared experience with open and honest communication, which has allowed for us to work through the difficult times, and I think we both have been willing to make it work. And it gets back to the earlier points that I've made. There's the kind of relationship behaviors, things that I needed to learn, to do to keep her happy, or to show my my respect and appreciation for her. Those things were learned, but you have to have that motivation, that self motivation, for it to be successful. If you don't have that motivation, then it doesn't matter. I mean, I could be a robot, and just kind of follow a script. But that's not point that wouldn't have necessarily been successful in the relationship.
Okay, very good. Okay, so this is good advice. Well, now, Craig, you often have good ideas about where the future opportunities are and these kinds of things. For people listening, this is the early part of 2021. We've experienced close to a year of the pandemic thing, a lot of changes. But what do you think has changed through all of this? And the opportunities. I mean, eventually the economy will come back. It seems like many people are saying we're going to work differently in the future. We're going to work from home. What do you think are some of the key things that'll change in the future?
Yeah, I think that there's kind of four big areas which I'm kind of focused on right now. I think the physical environment is going to be one of the big changes, and I am speaking about this through the filter of the business process outsourcing world, but I don't think it's limited to just that industry. I think you're seeing this in manufacturing, you're seeing this in financial services, retail, healthcare. I mean, you name it. I think there is unquestionably going to be a change required in how products and services are delivered in a physical in the way it's done physically today. And so I think the collection of brick and mortar call center offices, the way that those call center offices are configured, the way retail stores are configured, I think that will all change. And I think you're going to see some innovation that happens out of necessity, but also just because after what will probably be close to 2 years of dealing with COVID-19, it's customer behaviors are going to change. The expectations and the behaviors of customers are going to change. So that would be the first one. I think secondly, we've been talking about it for a number of years, and Richard, you and I have been talking about automation and AI and how that's going to replace or potentially replace humans. I am not of the mind that you will see a significant full replacement of, or one-to-one replacement of humans and bots. But I do think, and I advocate, a much speedier deployment of automation, AI, and virtual assistant technology. Because I think when configured with the live employee resources or assets, I think that is going to be the differentiator. The companies that get that right, that's going to be the differentiator in being successful in this new reality moving forward. I think that there has, for too long, there has been this expectation that companies know best for customers. I know this is not what everybody markets, but I think when you dig into it, there's been this belief system that when we can collect lots and lots of data about what customers are doing, what they're buying, how they're operating, then we can make the best decisions around how to serve and sell to those customers. And I think that has just been proven over and over again to be a fallacy. Customers can't be put into simplified boxes, and there isn't a one size fits all, or even a couple sizes fits all type of solution for how you support service and support customers. And so I think customers are getting fatigued with this very traditional approach, and the digital deployments have really only been I think facing a facing layer on top of still a kind of a big mess of manual process and business rules that are not driving customer satisfaction. And you're seeing this customer satisfaction has not increased. Customer satisfaction continues to decrease year on year, and that is with significant investments in automation, AI, and virtual assistant technology. But I don't think that anyone has yet really gotten the mix right, and I think there still is too much of a reliance on the company perspective and not on the customer perspective. And I think it will be enhanced. I think you can find success by finding the right blend between the automation, AI, and the live agent or live employee. I think the kind of third big area for me is compensation and benefits. Again, this is not necessarily limited to the business process outsourcing industry, but I think that the traditional compensation and benefit approaches are just not going to be successful moving forward. I think that there is a much more evolved set of needs and requirements amongst employees, which need to be addressed. Not intending to get into a big healthcare debate, but I think healthcare has become clearly very important even to younger employees when it wasn't before. And so as a benefit, healthcare, life insurance, savings plans, I think all of those type of financial safety nets, I think are becoming very clear that there needs to be a different approach there. And I think the movement, which I've always been a big fan of flex benefits, of again not having just a set of the same benefits for everybody, but giving options that kind of match the individual situations, I think is really important now in this world where you may have employees, you may have a large population of your employees who you never physically meet. They will be virtual, and they will be working from a location that you don't control as the company anymore, and they will have just a whole different set of needs and requirements. And I think the last piece is, and you and I have talked about this also, Richard. I think talent acquisition, just the way that you now source and market, you market jobs, source employees, train them, onboard them. It's just, and this is at all levels, not just frontline, but also management employees. I think it requires a very different approach, and I think we'll see some companies that do differentiate themselves in this area will be very, very successful moving forward. And I think you'll see the companies that do not change their approach will struggle. Will struggle significantly.
Okay, that's interesting. That's a lot of material, Craig. Okay. As for, the American economy has been, well, in my view, and many people's view, the engine of the world, certainly, from a consumer side. And it's a very important economy that, definitely for world growth and in many different ways. The United States is certainly a key economy and nation. What do you think about the next, 10 years for the American economy and so forth? What's your opinions on that, Craig?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still pretty bullish. But again, and maybe this is not the way that many view. I'm much more globalist in my thinking. I don't think that the success of the global economy is going to necessarily be linked directly to the success of the U.S. economy. I think there's no question there is the success in the U.S. economy will help fuel success in other markets, but I think there are lots of emerging markets which will continue to be successful and grow, and will become more and more globally influential. And I think this is where it come back to my comments earlier on just the difference between how a European company maybe views the world, or European executives view the world, and kind of U.S. executives. I don't think that the U.S. economy or U.S. executives will be successful if there's a continued kind of approach of like isolationism, or only optimizing the U.S. market above all others. I don't think that that's the right strategy. But look, I'm not an economist by any stretch of the imagination, and I have a pretty limited view. I think that there are, for all the bad that has come from COVID-19, what I hear consistently from everyone that I talk to, and this is not just U.S. based, it's all over the world. So there's so many new opportunities that have opened for companies that have recognized that there are new needs, new customer needs, new potential ways of doing business, new revenue streams, etc. And they're starting to take advantage of those things. And that's where I think the biggest the biggest opportunity is for the U.S. economy is recognizing that you in this new virtual world, there is an opportunity to sell in a significant way, in a much more significant way, U.S. products and services outside of the U.S. and vice versa, by taking advantage of this this new these new set of customer customer expectations and the technologies that are emerging to help facilitate that. I mean, who would have thought a year ago that you could leverage tools like Zoom, like we are, to generate decent revenue in areas that we wouldn't normally have thought about. There's a whole bunch of new concierge like shopping experiences that are being done virtually. We had dabbled in or I know companies had dabbled in this previously, but it just simply wasn't the same way. I mean, how you buy eyeglasses. I mean, that is all going to change, and the companies that are taking advantage of this are clearly going to have an advantage. And I think because there's the assets that are available, the resources that are available in the U.S. market and the advanced state of the U.S. market, I think the U.S. has a big advantage there to take advantage of that, but not. I think you'll find that the companies that are the most successful are the ones that recognize that there's a new global new global revenue streams and global customers that they can now serve and support and sell to that they didn't necessarily have access to previously.
Interesting. Okay. Well, one thing I maybe ask you about, Craig, is it's traditional time. I mean, I'll make it kind of be a bit of a joker a bit, but it used to be that whenever you were, not motivated about what you're doing, you could call up an American guy and he'd always be gung ho and keen to, give you, if it's to me, it's up to me, all this kind of a thing, and get you all motivated again. Lately, they've been a bit less, optimistic and so forth. So I kind of make it one of my missions, I hope, is to cheer up America. So can I give you a bit of a pitch on that?
Yeah.
If we look at Europe, I'm my mother was born in Austria, so I have a kind of a link there. But if you look at their demographics and so forth, they are really aging very quickly. And this decade will be the one where most of Europe becomes aged and their populations start to decline. Already most of the countries in the world that are declining in population are in Europe. Big countries like Russia, Germany, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Greece, and others will enter this population decline thing in this decade. So it's going to really be a big change. China and all of North Asia, Japan, Korea, this is the first year they will enter population decline. China by the end of the century. So who is going to be the consumer of the world and the real growth economy of the world? It seems to me that will be the United States. And with, their friends, little Canada, we're cute and nice, but we're kind of small and we help out. But, it's going to be really up to them. And I think Americans really will really come into their own as the superpower over this next decade. And if you look at the history of the world since 1945, when Europeans ran things in the world, they spent the past 1,000 years really killing each other and in almost continuous war for 500 years that became global wars when their countries were global powers. And that all ended, that cycle of hatred and death ended in 1945 when the Americans took over as the global superpower, initially to maybe fight off the Soviet Union, but the two countries both, despite a desperate struggle between them, they limited warfare and gradually it petered out. So we had the Korean War, the Vietnam War, to the point where nowadays we talk about deaths in skirmishes of a few dozens and we get really excited, where we used to speak about deaths in the millions and people would just accept that as natural. So I think when the history of the world is written, the United States, their contribution as that change agent for this is recognized. I know right now as the policeman of the world, the U.S. Navy doesn't get recognized, I think, sometimes as much as they should, despite the treasure and gold, so to speak, that they put at risk and spend to do that. But so I'll just add that, and hopefully maybe some of the American guys listening can maybe, because there really is a big future, it seems to me. I mean, China is the biggest paper tiger in the world. You speak to economists and talk about their debt situation, their population collapse. How are they going to be an engine of the world economy? It can only be, I'll say, North America, to put us Canadian guys in there with you, but the Mexicans too are making changes and making improvements. Yep. The United States really is going to be at the center of all this, it seems to me.
Yeah, Richard, I think that's a very good way of putting it. I think there's, the thing that is probably unique from the U.S. and Canadian, I would say it's a very similar approach, is that there's a diversity of thought and there's an appreciation for the for that diversity of thought. There's an appreciation for different perspectives, and I think that that's why the U.S. and Canada, and I think you're right about Mexico. I think that that belief system is what is going to continue to be a leading force globally. I think I agree with you about China. I mean, the thing with China that is just so interesting to me and has continued to interest me is that it's so big, and there is a fair amount of innovation. I mean, it's really quite shocking, like how much innovation is coming out of China. Same thing in markets like South Korea. You saw this in Japan for years, but I think there is the and I don't know if it's a restrictive element or not, but I think that's what has kind of prevented the Chinese, or will prevent the Chinese in the future from really leapfrogging this North American approach. And I think the issue with Europe is that while there's Europe is tremendously diverse. It's really a kind of a collection of much smaller, entities or countries that have their own, kind of diversity, and so it's a bit more complicated. I don't think you're going to see kind of a European, push like what we're talking about with North America. But I do think you're going to continue to see, Germany be a serious player, and I think you're going to see, Russia continue to kind of nip at everyone's heels. But again, I think that Russia is does not have the same kind of diversity of thought and appreciation for that as I think you have in some of these other markets. And so I think you're right. And I will just say I'm I think like many people, I'm emotionally spent, over and fatigued over what we have collectively gone through in this last year. But I am not, I am looking at, there's so much evidence that things will continue to rebound. There's just so much. I'm very bullish, and I'm actually quite excited. And really, I'm chomping at the bit, to kind of to get on with it, because I think some of our best days are actually ahead. And you see that in many of the. I mean, look, the stock market in the U.S. is just on fire. I mean, even whether I don't know if what your view is on cryptocurrencies. I mean, Bitcoin is over $40,000 right now, and there's significant, major big institutional investments, into cryptocurrency. There's lots of new, opportunities. Again, you can debate whether it's all a magic trick or not, and all kind of fake. But the services, the products and services that are coming out of this are just incredible, and the innovation that's coming out of this is frankly really, really exciting, even if the financial element of it proves to not be as proves to just be a unicorn. I'm really quite excited about what's going to happen. I just think we need to be realistic. We probably won't see some of that until 2022. I just cannot. I can't see realistically things materially changing in terms of how we need to protect the population within 2021.
Okay, interesting. But yeah, I agree. The cryptocurrency thing, we just need that as an alternative, and I'm so pleased that others seem to be agreeing with their money. We've seen financial crises come roughly every 10 years during my entire life, and so we just need to have an alternative in case the central bankers screw it all up. Craig, you talked about the U.S. and global economy. What about Philippines in particular? A lot of people listening will be from Philippines. What are your views on the future of Philippines, the opportunities and threats about this economy?
Yeah, I think the Philippines is going to be fine, but I'm concerned right now, as I know many are. I'm concerned that there is a lack of appreciation for, specifically for the business process outsourcing industry in the Philippines. I think that it's a big mistake to not be taking this time that we have, this forced pause, to put together a strategy on how we're going to market the Philippines in the near future and get it back onto a growth trajectory. I'm generally disappointed in in where things have landed from from an incentive perspective. I think there are some real some real missed opportunities, there. That could have been a win-win for everyone. And I think, I think it's way too conservative in its current form. But look, I mean, Richard, as I've shared with you many times over this last decade and a half since we've known each other, the real opportunity, untapped potential of the Philippines is outside of Metro Manila. Yeah. And so that is where, I'm optimistic. I think the investments of, you've got a third telecom operator, potentially a fourth, coming online, the competition, but also the investments that will be made in infrastructure and telecom infrastructure and really lighting up the countryside in the Philippines, I think is not too late, but it needs to happen as quickly as possible. And I think tapping into the 80 plus million people that live outside of the national capital region is really the untapped, yet to truly be untapped potential of what could truly accelerate the Philippines economy in the coming years.
Yeah. Okay. There was a guy I heard about who made a good presentation about the middle market opportunity for Philippines and India and other countries. His point was most large global companies have done business process outsourcing, or it used to be called, now it's just called business. But mid-size and small companies, a much bigger employment segment, has not done very much or anything really by comparison. The COVID thing has put it kind of in the spotlight, because you could have an accountant, has been with you for a number of years. His salary maybe is a bit high and his output is maybe not. And he's working from home now, and he's costing you, I don't know, pick a number, $5,000 a month or something like this. You could, as a business owner, you could say, well, maybe I could have someone in Philippines doing that same work for $500 a month. I'm exaggerating a bit. But do you think this is going to move that needle forward, or is it still going to take time? What do you think?
Well, I mean, I think it's maybe a variation on one of the themes we were talking about earlier, but I think there is nothing preventing skilled workers, knowledge workers, or otherwise, but I guess mostly knowledge workers, from working at home in remote parts of the Philippines. Yeah. The restriction is that companies have not invested in the process, technology, and organization to untap that resource pool. Meaning, take for example the bandwidth requirement for streaming a high definition Netflix show.
Yes.
We have that capability today to almost every single household that has a Globe or PLDT smartphone. I mean, there is more than enough bandwidth, and the backbone that supports that transport of that data is more than sufficient now in the Philippines. And so you've got last mile connections. Granted, there may be some reliability issues in some of those markets, but there is no reason why. There's plenty of bandwidth to those individuals to deliver a voice and even potentially a video interaction for the business process outsourcing industry. really any knowledge management, telemedicine, pick your knowledge management, option. Telemedicine, CAD design, software development, you could do any of that stuff from pretty much anywhere. But the tools and the organization is not set up that way. You still have companies that operate in a very traditional way with a supervisor, a floor supervisor, and 15 or 16 call center agents that sit in a little physical pod and operate with a physical, many, I don't know what the number is, but if you did an inventory, I would suspect that there is a fair percentage, well more than 50% of every workstation that supports a knowledge worker in the Philippines still has a physical hard phone on the desktop. They're not using a soft phone. I would say at least 50%, probably more like 75% of the technology is client side, heavy software installations on a PC, on a relatively high end PC that needs to have the processing power and the memory to sufficiently support those applications. Again, investments in SaaS and DaaS and IaaS and all these other technologies are, that's been done, and that stuff is available. But you have to have a process. Again, back to my point on talent acquisition and training. Today, the vast majority of contact center and knowledge workers are employed with at least one part of the process requires a physical, connection. I have to physically come in. I have to physically sign my contract. I have to physically, produce my NBI, clearance and my, and my other work documents. I have to, physically meet with someone to show them my, all this stuff is we can overcome. But you have to have a business model that, that supports that and helps to, facilitate that kind of, that kind of knowledge worker. And so that's why it's all there. And it's why I'm quite optimistic, and I think that there are a number of companies that are realizing this, but it needs to be a focus. And for most companies, I'm not seeing that, especially in the Philippines. I'm not seeing that happen just yet. I'm seeing most companies still trying to figure out and arguing about improving the physical distance requirements, the physical configuration of their brick and mortar facilities to get more people back into the office. Like, that seems to be the priority, and I think that's where I would say my advice is. That's the opportunity, is to figure out how to get out of those expensive brick and mortar, tap into a much lower cost, higher quality employee that lives, that may have to work from home and lives in a remote part of the country, and expose that to your clients for much higher customer satisfaction and, frankly, profit.
Yeah, frankly. Okay, that's good. Craig, this has been fantastic. Last questions about you. We've talked about how everyone else is going. What about you personally? Are you, you're not that close to retirement, are you? Or are you? Are you just going to keep on going until you
I don't have any interest in retiring. I wanted to take a little bit of time, off, which I did, and again, silver lining of COVID has been being able to spend lots of time with my family, and not having to to worry about the commute and the all those things. So no, I don't have any interest in in retiring anytime soon. I'm investigating a number of really interesting projects that are coming up. I've been doing some consulting, some transformation consulting for a large telecommunications company in the U.S., which has been just a ton of fun. And I've gotten a chance to work with former mentor of mine who asked me to come in and work with him, which has been really has been a lot of fun. So just evaluating some new opportunities that are presenting themselves, again, because of needing to change how we do business in this new reality. So it's just great timing, and it's a great fit. But at the same time, I started a company called Service Hive about just over 6 years ago, and have been working on a patent which has been a labor of love more than anything else, and just still pursuing my passions in customer experience, and I have a real deep appreciation for for what we can do collectively as an industry in the customer management and business process outsourcing industry. So I'm going to continue to to work in this space, and it's been fun in this last year, having an opportunity to stay connected, with folks like you and Rebecca, and other people that I have a lot of respect for within my network, and you just being available, as I shared at the very beginning of the pandemic, and I want to share for anyone who may watch this podcast. I feel really strongly that this, because of the situation that we're all collectively in, it's without a doubt the most impactful global event that any of us have ever been through, and certainly I don't know that that we'll ever see anything like this again. And because of that, I know that there are many people that are struggling emotionally, or or from a career perspective, lot of uncertainty and whatnot. And I would just offer up that I don't know that I can be of any help, but if I can, I'm certainly making myself available. And I have had a number of former employees, but also people I've worked for and worked with, that have reached out, and I've just offered to be a shoulder to cry on, or an ear to scream into, or whatever. But I do feel some obligation, I guess you could call it, to just offer up that there is, as I know you are also, Richard. There are people that do care, and and will be a resource as may be needed, to help kind of get through this situation. I think we'll all come out much stronger on the back end. But anyway, I just wanted to call it out. I'm open. I have someone who's become a friend with one of the companies that I've been working with, who we have a call every 2 weeks now, and she refers to me as her shrink. We don't really talk about anything other than just there's an opportunity. So if I can do that, I within the network, I'm more than happy to to provide that.
Really? Okay. Well, maybe I could mention that if people. I mean, it has to be. Maybe they could send me a message directly if they like, and I can have an introduction and see what happens. Can't make any promises for Craig, of course, but certainly be glad to do that. And I know you've produced or helped produce many very senior people in the industry in Philippines, very well paid people, which we never could have imagined the kind of income levels for Filipinos working in Philippines developing their career. And it really came about from this business process outsourcing industry and guys like you who came in, who really pushed it and with new ideas. So it's been a tremendous success and something that you and others can be proud. Keep up the great work. We'll see what happens in the next 15 years of your career involvement in Philippines and in other countries. So be well, my friend.
Thank you so much. Really enjoyed it. As always, Richard.
Thank you for watching Going Deep with me, Richard Mills, and we interviewed Craig Reines for what is the longest interview session that he has ever done and one of the longest I've ever done in my life. He really put forth all of his information and learnings from his lifetimes to help other people. So take it to heart, learn from him, and you can only do well too. So really nice to have you for this version of Going Deep with me, Richard Mills. Look forward to seeing you again in the future. Thank you.